It is such a pleasure and such a privilege to be welcoming the brilliant Claire Denis in conversation with Adam Shatz. Just a couple of notes. If this is your first time at the library, welcome. We're delighted to have you on this very hot summery night. We have been in operation for over 100 years. We're the largest English language lending library on the European continent. And in this period of operation, we've been the intellectual home to figures such as Ernest Hemingway, Gertrude Stein, Edith Wharton, and we remain a living cultural center today, hosting figures such as the brilliant and wonderful Claire and Adam, who will be speaking here tonight. After about 45 minutes of this conversation, we're also going to be opening this up to questions from our in-person audience first, and then if we have time, our Zoom audience as well, who's trapped inside that camera right there. So hello, Zoom audience. Thank you for joining us. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will try to get to them when we have time. And that's all you need to know. On to our brilliant speakers tonight. Claire Denis is a French film director and screenwriter. She needs no introduction, but I'll briefly give her one, and I believe Adam will give her one as well, so she will be thoroughly introduced. Her feature film, Beau Travail, has been called one of the greatest films of the 1990s and of all time. Other acclaimed works include Trouble Every Day, 35 Shots of Rum, White Material, High Life, and Both Sides of the Blade, the last of which won her the Silver Bear for Best Director at the Berlin International Film Festival. For her film Stars at Noon, she competed for the Palme d'Or at the 2022 Cannes Film. Ah non? Grand Prix, excusez-moi. Pardon. Le Grand Prix at the 2022 Cannes Film Festival. Adam, tonight, Claire is appearing in conversation with the wonderful Adam Shatz. Adam Shatz is the US editor of the London Review of Books and a contributor to the New York Review of Books, the New Yorker, and many other publications. He is the author of the fantastic The Rebels Clinic, The Revolutionary Lives of Frantz Fanon, which has just been released and won numerous prizes and praises, and of Writers and Missionaries, essays on radical imagination. Adam is also the author, the host of the podcast Myself with Others, and the recipient of the 2024 Guggenheim Fellowship. And Adam is a visiting fellow at the American Library in Paris this month. This visiting fellowship is generously supported by the De Groot Foundation. We're so thankful for the help that they have given us in putting on this event tonight. So thank you to them. Thank you to Claire. Thank you to Adam. Can we please have a round of applause for our speakers?
May I say just a few words before you start introducing me? My English is a little bit awkward. Because it's the biggest place in Europe, English speaking. Well, I'm a little bit afraid. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for that lovely introduction. Nevertheless, I'm going to introduce you again. Claire Denis once said that the films that move her are the image of the world. Once we've seen them, they enter our memory. We cannot erase them from ourselves. That's been my experience of Claire Denis' films. And judging from the interest this event has generated, I doubt that I'm alone. Claire is a storyteller, but she's found a radically different path to storytelling, one that draws its power more from images, sounds, and moods than from words or plot lines. She's worked in a remarkable range of genres, always testing herself, refusing to repeat herself. Since her extraordinary 1988 debut, Chocolat, about a young white girl in Cameroon during the twilight of French colonialism, she's made thrillers, noirs, romances, horror and science fiction films, movies about political intrigue in Nicaragua and civil war in West Africa. Yet, for all the restlessness and variety of her work, it has an exceptional coherence, a radiant sense of identity. She reminds me in this regard of Miles Davis, another innovator and risk-taker whose work, however much it changed, was always instantly identifiable. You know when you're watching a Claire Denis film, just as surely as you can recognize the sound of Miles's trumpet. So please join me in welcoming Claire Denis to the American Library in Paris. So, Claire, you were born in 1946 and spent much of your childhood in Cameroon, I think also in Djibouti. Your father was a civil administrator, and you've said that you would never have become the filmmaker you are today if you hadn't grown up in Africa in a house without running water and electricity. Can you talk a bit about how your years in Cameroon shaped your vision as a filmmaker?
I think both my parents were not made to live in France. They both wanted to escape, and that's probably why they married each other, to run away. My father was born in Bangkok. From his father himself was running away from Europe after the First World War. And my mother was half Brazilian, and they both wanted, after the war, they really wanted something else in their life. And my father started to be this young French administrator, but he was not so interested in administration, or he was interested in having a life that would open himself more and more. He was afraid of any kind of job that would. It's a strange noise, no? No, but it's okay. No, it's a door. It's okay. No, I mean, I don't know, but I was 2 months old when my mother brought me to Cameroon. So, of course, I don't remember. And because my father was young and he was not, he was a sort of a free mind. He was not, they were noted, those administrators. He was not extremely.
I think, he was a supporter of African independence and of Algerian independence, which was not typical for all civil administrators in places like Cameroon.
Yeah, as far as I remember, he was completely open to the ideas of independence in Africa, but the news coming from the French people living in Algeria were people, they thought they were living in France, like in a part of France, you know. The people living in the West Africa or East Africa when I was in Djibouti knew they were either working for the French government or having a business somewhere, you know. So they were suddenly, the war in Indochina and Algeria was like earthquake in Africa, the beginning of something that was, of course, the end of the Second World War, I guess. Yeah. But as I grew up, I realized I was raised in a different way. My father was very, not like me, he liked to speak different language. He was fluent in English, and Cameroon had two languages, French and English, and Nigeria was also very close. And my father could speak fluent Pidgin, as we say, which is a sort of English Creole. He could speak different 3 languages. Cameroon has 340 language, I think. My father could speak 3, and he was always greedy to be more. I think my father wanted to disappear, to be absorbed by a country. So we were educated like that, you know, with a deep resentment, like when every 2 years we were obliged to go back to France to see our grandparents for a month or two. We were sort of frightened. I think my cousin were looking at us like I could not play with them, at my grandparents. I felt really I was not belonging to the same family, and I liked it. I was proud of my parents to be those rather free people, not interested by, of course, not interest to create a business. Not, they were interested in gardening, reading, learning language. They were open to for us, to so much of the countries we have been. Cameroon 3 times, Burkina Faso in Ouagadougou, Ivory Coast, and Djibouti.
But your parents were in some ways a study in contrast. Your father was a person of ideals, maybe a bit of a dreamer. You've described your mother as being very pessimistic, kind of tending towards melancholy. She preferred to just drink and to smoke and to read but
smoke,
not drink.
Less.
But she was but she loved cinema, and I think that you remarked somewhere that because she missed the movies so much in Cameroon, she would tell you the plots of films rather than tell you stories. And I guess one of the plots was the plot to Breathless.
I think, it's true that my mother, she was missing nothing in Cameroon or in Ouagadougou except cinema and maybe her father. But because she has been raised by this Brazilian father, but I think, she was missing only cinema. She was reading books where post office were functioning, so she was receiving books from France, and she was very happy in those countries. She was a very polite person, a very discreet person. She was exactly the opposite of the caricature of the French colonial, My mother was not at all, She was almost shy in a way. I remember when I was 3 or 4, we were in north of Cameroon, and we had a cook who was English speaking, not French speaking. My mother couldn't speak English, so he was cooking exactly what you wanted. My mother would never dare ask him,
That does turn up in Chocolat.
Yeah. She was always happy, and when my father was telling her maybe we could change a little bit, she said, no, don't ask me to ask him, because he's so good cook, such a good cook. I'm not going to ask him anything,
What was
But it was not like, when I say that, I realize my words describe a sort of naivety that could be also a sort of white superiority, a big naivety, No, it was true. My mother was not naive at all,
I mean, there were also some ordeals that the family faced in Cameroon. I mean, and polio was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
You contracted it. Your sister also
Me and my sister, yeah. Because we were supposed, the vaccine existed already, and we were living in Yaoundé, the big city of Cameroon, the capital of Cameroon, and it was like June and end of school, and my mother had decided to fly to France to have her children vaccinated against polio, because she was afraid maybe the hospital in Yaoundé were not keeping the vaccine in a cold enough place. I mean, this is my mother, So we were waiting to go to France, and suddenly my sister got sick, and then the doctor in the hospital said it's polio. They make the exam in the bones, you know, and I start to be sick too. And the doctor tell my mother, there is never two cases of polio in the same family. It's impossible because one case will, how do you say, protect the family in a way. And my mother left in a sanitary plane with my sister to go direct to an hospital in Paris, Necker, actually. And me, I stay in Yaoundé. And a week later, they realized I was also having polio. So I had to go to hospital, but without my mother. Yeah, it was not fun.
What was the first film that stirred your interest in cinema? I mean, the film that I've seen you refer to frequently is Suddenly Last Summer
Yeah.
with Elizabeth Taylor in the white bathing suit.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was living in the suburb, not in Paris. And of course, I couldn't go to evening screenings because I wouldn't be allowed to come back too late. And I had a friend whose parents were living in Paris. So during the weekend, I could go to a place, sleep there. And I remember one afternoon near Champs-Élysées, she was living in the 17th arrondissement. We walked to the Champs-Élysées and suddenly last summer was playing. It was not the first time, you know, at this time in France, you were paying less expensive if the film was playing second time, you know. There was exclusivity and second exclusivity. So the film was playing in a smaller cinema and we lie about our age. And we saw suddenly last summer, I had not read Tennessee Williams yet. And I think we did not completely understood what was happening between on the beach, actually. But of course, we understood, but we could not even. Maybe it's a time where you understand without speaking about it, you know. And it struck me at that time that film where there was so much different language in a film, you know, different level of understanding in a film. Things even I could ignore, like using a poor cuisine as a bait to attract young Mexican boys, for example, in that film, you know. And these things were not really conceivable in my life, but yet a film give you something. And I remember when she's taken to the, I mean, everything in that film, I don't want to speak about the film anymore, but I mean, I understood so many levels a film could bring. Without
necessarily putting a name to it.
And no explanation. Better, no explanation. Yeah.
Which is true in many ways of your films, I think.
Yeah, maybe too much. I think I'm really, I have to be, it's not, I realize sometimes I think everything is understood is understandable in a film, and it's not. If I see a film 5 years after, I'm petrified, you know. I trust something that maybe does not exist so much today. Maybe it was existing long time ago, not so much now.
I think that sense of like the implicit, some implicit that's grasped is hard to lost.
I think a film could express a Tennessee Williams novel without be explicit completely, you know. And in a way, it was maybe even more cruel than in the novel. I think today it will be necessary to explain,
to lay it out.
The cousin is gay and etc. etc.
I want to talk a little bit about how you became a filmmaker, because it wasn't really clear that that was the direction you were going, and you married a much older photographer when you were still in your teens, and
He was 30. No.
Okay. And
no, not 60. No.
It was a brief.
Because today I'm afraid to say my husband was much older, you know.
And you ended up working on a film in Spain with Lino Ventura and Brigitte Bardot. But you also,
thanks to the guy, the guy who was directing the film school, I was not sure I would go, because I start working in a place that was a sort of little studio that was working with the Ministry of Cooperation, because after the independence, there was this Ministry of Cooperation, which means you could cooperate with the new countries of Africa. And there was, in this place, they were making little films or documentary to send to school or to college in different parts of Africa. And I was working on with a little crew. We were making motion pictures with drawing about, let's say, the first one I worked was how to protect from mosquitoes, not to get malaria, you know, things like that, you know, to be sent to school in Niger. Voilà. We were working with a school that in Niger, they try, because in Niger is very vast with a lot of desertic part. So they try to make school through television, because they did not have enough teachers, you know, and those little films were made to explain to kids how to protect themselves from mosquitoes on the way to school or coming back, you know, things like that. And then the people there told me, you should try to go to that film school. It's stupid not to. So I was afraid, and I did, and I passed the exam, and I was in that school, and the guy who was directing the school was great. He knew we needed money, so in the summer he would send us as trainee on large film who could pay us, you know. That's why I was sent in south of Spain to be a trainee on a film with Brigitte Bardot, Lino Ventura. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds as though you were also tempted a bit by the theater, because you were very passionate about Peter Brooks's work at the time.
I met Peter Brook through my husband. And Peter Brook had, he liked me because he asked me to go, he invite me to his school. And then I told him I'm absolutely not interested to be an actress, absolutely not. But I would like to invite you to the cinema school to teach us what you do with the actor and actresses. And he did, he was coming to us, yeah.
Now, then comes your discovery of a filmmaker who I think was hugely important to you, and that was Jacques Rivette.
Yes.
You later went on to, you made a documentary about him much later, but you said that Rivette opened doors for us. With Rivette, I could imagine living. Everything seemed possible. What was it that you learned from Rivette?
Uh, you know, in a school, you create some, you invent a little bit. I like this film. I hate this one. It's a little bit exaggerated. So I decided to oppose myself to other students. I dislike François Truffaut, but I was crazy about Jacques Rivette. And it was true in a way, but not completely. And there was this new school was completely transformed after 68. No more teachers, only filmmakers or director of photography or editor working when they were out of work, they could come to school and teach us. And the director of photography was working with Jacques Rivette. And one day he took me he- on the set of Out One. And and
That's the 8 hour, 12 hour
hours,
film.
yeah. Mm. And it was so simple and familiar to be on the set with Juliette Berthaud, um, Bulogier. It was like with Jacques Rivette, there was no borders. Even a shy person like I was could, even if I was hiding in the corner, I could be introduced. And in a way, it was the most. Um, Jacques Rivette was so open to young people, whether they were students or actors. He, he had absolutely no interest in how to be a professional, uh, absolutely no interest. So it creates a sort of real relation where he would ask me, let's say tomorrow I'm working on a new script. Would you like to come? Things like that. I was immediately invited, although I had absolutely no knowledge. So it was very important. And he was also such a generous and funny. He had this kind of discreet humor. And also he was fierce, when he was in La Bande des Quatre, the guy of the Nouvelle Vague, in the Cahiers du Cinéma, Godard, Truffaut, they call him Robespierre. So it means who he was really. So sometimes he could be very fierce, mm, but not against me.
Was it, I mean, I wonder, were there other filmmakers in your early, well, while you were studying film, who were important to you? I mean, were you,
But
was
Godard, I
Bresson,
like Bresson, of course. Bresson, yes. Bresson was like already a sort of statue, you know. I remember when I was in that school, um, another director of photography was shooting with Robert Bresson, a film with Robert Bresson by the Seine River. And he decided to ask all the students of school to be engaged as extra passing by in the scene so we could see Robert Bresson working. And, so I was there for 4 nuits d'un rêveur.
I mean, there weren't that many, there were few female filmmakers working then. There was Agnès Varda, of course.
Trintignant.
Right. And then there was Chantal Ackerman's Belgium, though, and she hadn't really come along yet.
No, Chantal, I saw a first film after school.
Okay.
Yeah. I went to, there was a festival, fantastic festival for us because it was not expensive like Cannes or Venice. It was Rotterdam. And it was easy to take a train. And Francis Bals, the guy who created Rotterdam Festival, had rented a big boat, and you could sleep in the boat, for free. Yeah. So I remember that's the place where I saw the first film by Chantal Ackerman with her. She was there, It was a great place, Rotterdam. Yeah.
God.
And Godard was always coming to Rotterdam with this kind of, he was terribly, we were terribly intimidated, but it was so, it's great to have an idol, and when Jean-Luc Godard died, when Jacques Rivette died, it was losing a friend. But when Jean-Luc Godard died, not so long ago, it was like losing a wall in a house, It was like losing, maybe not the roof, to be honest, but at least a wall or two, And I was shaken, I remember I told people when he died, maybe something will happen, something terrible will happen. The next morning, I realized nothing happened except he was dead.
I mean, there are some terrible things could happen very soon, but they're not cinematic necessarily.
No. Except Jean-Luc decided to die that day. It was his own decision.
It was.
And this is very also, it's part of the idol.
You went on to work very closely, well, as an assistant director with Wim Wenders on Paris, Texas, and Wings of Desire, and then with Jim Jarmusch on Down by Law.
Yeah. So when I was in this cinema school in Paris, this nouvelle vague of German directors, among them Wim Wenders, it was amazing because the French Nouvelle Vague was already old in a way, 74, 75. And suddenly those guys from Germany,
Herzog and Fassbinder.
Yeah, linked together. They create this edition Verlag to protect their film. It was so strong for us. Yeah. So let's say at a time where being an assistant was finished for me, I had saved enough money to decide to stop and be able to do a first film. I realized, Wim Wenders called me and asked me to work with him on Paris, Texas. It was, I have to say, terrifying because immediately I understood it was not because I was an interesting person, but maybe also because he had a French co-production, so he needed maybe one or two members of the crew to be French, No, I realized. So I was a little bit hesitating to say yes, but then Wim Wenders was so convincing. So he gave me this sort of speech like, I need you, I need you. And so I said yes, like, I don't regret, but I realized he was very persuasive, and I did location scouting with him. in a car. We were going on the 10 from east to west, from Louisiana to California, scouting. And it was, for me, French person discovering this lot of the state in one trip, and eating breakfast in small motels. I mean, living something no other experience could give, with this German guy who spoke such a great American with American accent. At that time, Wim was wearing Western boots. He looked like Buffalo Bill, you know. And it was so incredible. I thought, I'm so lucky. But on the other hand, it gave me a real energy to immediately after that go to come to some part of Africa to make sure I find the location for my film, to look for a producer, things like that. And in the meantime, John Lurie, the musician who had a small part in Paris, Texas.
John Lurie.
John Lurie, yeah. Told Jim Jarmusch, you should meet her, she's great, you know. And Jim Jarmusch had doing a film in Louisiana, he thought probably that in Louisiana, the Cajun people and a French person speak the same language.
So another happy accident.
So each time we were in the bayous, Tom West or Jim said, could you speak to the Cajun and ask for this or for that? I said, but I don't understand a word, you know. I have to speak English with them, you know. It's true.
Yeah. So you ended up going to Cameroon and making your first full-length feature there, Chocolat. And one of the things that's extraordinary about this film, well, for one thing, it's you came out fully formed. I mean, it was a Claire Denis film already. There was no transition, I think.
I have no idea. I was not aware.
Yeah, and the film, of course, is about this family that's inspired by your own family with the little girl at the center. And yet at the same time, it turns crucially on the character played by Isaac de Bancole, this young man who is
a servant, a
who's working, yes, who's working for the family. And I remember you telling me a story when I interviewed you for the Fanon book about this young man who worked for you, who was a cook, I think, and who was killed.
No, it was. Sorry, yeah.
Was killed in a protest.
Yeah, no, the cook, yeah. But this was in Yaoundé.
Okay.
In Yaoundé, during the huge in Cameroon, the communist, there was a strong communist party, and when the protest for independence started after Ghana. Ghana was the first country, but in Cameroon, it immediately took fire, and especially in the south, where there were a lot of coffee plantation owned by white people. And I remember once in Yaoundé, which is up north, I mean, not north, but 300 kilometers from Douala, neither my mother or father were afraid in a way. They thought, they agree, so no danger could touch us. And I was with my little sister in the garden, and our garden ended near the police station. And there was a big fight there. Soldier on the roof of the police station shooting on on people coming from the market with stones and bottles. And the cook was with us, my sister, me, and the cook. And suddenly the cook fell. And I was surprised, and he was shot and he was dead. And we were children, and we start screaming. I took my little sister, who was wearing the very high heels of my mother, so she couldn't run. So I took her in my arms, and my mother realized. And we were trying to take the cook inside, but the alley was too long. It was, and then my mother put mattress on the window, and she put us under the bed. And suddenly she was afraid. Only then.
In this film, Chocolat, and in your next two films, Sans fout la mort and J'ai pas sommeil, I can't sleep, you established yourself as one of the few white French filmmakers, in fact, one of the few French filmmakers at the time who were exploring questions of race, racism, blackness, and in a sense, I guess you were returning to some of the concerns that had moved you in your late teens. I remember that you first read Les Damnés de la Terre, the Wretched of the Earth, Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. In your, I guess, 18 or 19, you found the book at the Maspero bookstore, and then Alex Desgas, the actor who's worked with you on many occasions, recommended
From Martinique,
right, and he recommended that you read Black Skin, White Mask.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you at the time encountered any resistance, whether from people who questioned the value of the subjects that you were taking on, or who questioned whether you were the person to make those films.
I was aware of nothing, to be honest. When I read The Damnés de la Terre, for me, a student, it was an obligation to go to Maspero and buy the book there, It was not because I grew up in Africa. And reading Les Damnés de la Terre was a must. And it's maybe when I read Black Skin, White Mask, I realized it was he described something as a little child, I was aware, because it's instant. When you're a child, especially small, with not so much of an education, you realize the difference. You don't understand why there is a difference between being white and being black, especially if you live not in huge city like in Europe, but if you live in small village in an African country where you are the only white, actually, I realized that when the only white family I met were the Norwegian missionaries, there was a lot of Norwegian missionaries in Cameroon. They have open hospital, and they were not Catholic, they were Protestant, and they came naked. I remember that they came not with the government of Norway, of course, like we were supposed to be French colonial, They were so poor, but they were white. And it was strange to be a child and to discover that difference, and to realize that somebody would bring me my food on the table, that I was somebody would clean the sheet of my bed, things like that, where I knew when I was in France with my grandfather, no, that nobody was doing nothing for us, you know. And it was so, I have to say, it's difficult to express it in those terms when you're four, but I was ashamed, really. And I think that's why my mother was always trying to do a lot, because she understood we were all ashamed in a way, you know.
What was also very striking about the films was their style, just the fractured way that you had of telling stories. I mean, there to quote, Godard, there was a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. And shortly before his death, the great French film critic Serge Danet, friend of yours, warned you that you were, and I'm quoting, in danger as a filmmaker. And he said, you believe that to make a film, you have to put yourself in the middle of things, but there are two seats at the cinema. Either we put ourselves in the center of the cyclone at the risk of being demolished, or like Howard Hawks, we distance ourselves. In the middle, you can't see anything. And you said, I already knew he was right. Unfortunately, I can't help but go towards the middle. I'm not interested in the diagram and the total design. I often realize this is not the right solution for telling a story. We see the landscape better by taking a step back, like Cezanne's mountain. If we climb it every day, we see it less well. But deep down, I prefer to climb. Well, I mean, I'm glad you ignored Danet's advice, and I think most of us are. But what do you get by climbing, by not seeing the total design? And what does the total design overlook?
It's probably a weakness of me. The attraction of going inside and to be absorbed is great. And I remember something else in the same day. Danae said, remember a guy like Nicholas Ray died from that. And I was an admirer of Nicholas Ray, of course, and I was petrified when he said that, because the thing is, Wim made a film with Nicholas Ray too, and I thought maybe he's right. Maybe Nicholas Ray was ejected from Hollywood because he was attracted by the nuclear center, you know, too much. Of course, Howard Hawks is a great filmmaker. It's not to
Denigrate Howard
no,
Hawks.
no, no, but it's to be in the distance and to look. For me, it was not possible for me. I don't know. I think it's a weakness. And I want to say something else. Before I read The Damnés de la Terre or Frantz Fanon, my mother was reading a lot, and she received all the exemplary of La Série Noire by Gallimard.
Chester Himes.
And there was, as a child, all the Chester Himes, Série Noire, translate and edit, you know. And it was such a, because I was stealing those to my mother. She didn't know I was reading La Série Noire. But it was such different, all the other famous American writers who were translated in the Série Noire were speaking of a sort of America I could see in films also. I knew it exists. Chester Himes was different. He was speaking of how hard it is to be Black in the States. And I remember that from the beginning as I start reading.
Your films have attracted a lot of academic admirers, and you've been very plain spoken about them. You said film theory is just a pain in the ass. Oh. And I'm not at all interested in theories about cinema. I'm only interested in images and people and sound. You've also said that you hate this term that the Americans use, female gaze. What is that? I never wondered when I saw my first films if they were a product of the male gaze. When I read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, I understood, but I recognized myself very strongly in books written by men, Sanctuary or Wild Palms by William Faulkner.
Yeah, it's true. It was now today. It's of course everybody speak about male gaze and female gaze, but the first time I heard that, I think it was in the New York Film Festival, and I was amazed. I never knew there was a female gaze or a male gaze. For me, already to have a gaze was difficult enough. So to think it's female or male, oh my God, I was petrified, So, and in filmmaking, I think when, of course, pain in the ass is rude speaking, but I think to have a theory about film, it's a little bit boring because it's in filmmaking, you can write so many versions of a script. And then when you are shooting a film on set with actors, and if you are not in a studio and you have not the control of the weather and of everything, like in a big studio with a lot of money to create exactly what is written on a script, you have to admit that a theory doesn't help in those moments of despair when you were expecting a really sunny summer and it's raining every day, for instance, But it's true. It's better to be connected in a way with what could happen for the best, and not a film theory. I think I may be wrong, but
Before we take questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you about what I think is one of the most distinctive and mesmerizing aspects of your film and your films, and it's your sensitivity to music. And I'm thinking of the great Abdul Ibrahim soundtracks in your early films, and then your use of the Commodore's Night Train and in Night Shift and 35 Shots of Rum, or the fact that since 1996, I think with Nanette Boni, you've been working with the British group Tindersticks, and they've played a really important role in creating a kind of hypnotic atmosphere in your films. Can you talk a bit about what music means to you?
The meeting Abdullah Ibrahim, still today, I could shake, and I remember the fear. I was listening Abdullah Ibrahim. I was buying his records. I remember if I was traveling sometime to Switzerland or Holland to see a concert by Abdullah Ibrahim alone on the piano or with a band. And then when I was writing the script of Chocolat with my colleague Jean-Paul Fargeau in Marseille, I told him only one music is possible. Because it will be so rude to make a fake African music in the film. It has to be a sort of remembrance of something from Africa, and I thought, Abdullah, that's the music of Abdullah. So I went to New York. I found his address in the Chelsea Hotel, and he was so tall and frightening. And he said, yes, of course, I can read the script. No, his voice was not like mine. But no. And he read the script and he said, okay. And he said one thing, but he knew nothing about making music for films. So when we were recording the music in New Jersey, in his studio, Rudy Van Gelder, very famous studio, the guy
Rudy Van Gelder,
who did all the Blue
All the Blue Note
Notes.
records.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So already I was afraid being there, because I was like, not only I was like an intruder. Everybody were looking at me, and they were playing 7, 8 minutes, and I would wave to Rudy Van Geller. Says, "No, the scene is only 2 minutes," and Rudy would say, "You don't stop those musicians with his German accent, You don't stop those musicians." So I came back to France with piece of music, and I was so afraid to cut. But of course, I was very lucky. Yeah.
And Tindersticks?
Tindersticks, I met them in Paris, in the Bataclan, in a concert. And voilà, it's Bataclan, sad. Yeah. And I met them, and I was working on the script, Nanette and Bonnie, and one of their songs was called My Sister. And I tried to figure out how to go backstage. I could go, and I was introduced to the singer, Stuart, and he said, "Why do you ask us a song? Let's do the music of the film." And they came in. I was shooting in Marseille. They came in Marseille. They came in the editing room. They were very close. I thought it's happened only once, but we are still working together. So.
And you said that Stuart Staples, a member of the band, just has an exceptional sensitivity to the body and to the way that you feel about.
Yeah, I think so. But Stuart Staples comes from the north of England. For many years, I did not understand maybe one word in a sentence I could understand. His accent is so strong. And my accent, when I speak English, it doesn't understand my English. Still today, now I live in France. So his wife translate me, because his wife learns French easily. But Stuart is still the same,
Well, I think we have a bit of time for questions now.
Can we have a round of applause first, please?
Thank you.
We don't have much time for questions, but we'll certainly get to some. And I see a hand that's already been raised, so I will bring you the microphone.
High Life is an incredible film by any standard, and it is about the ultimate exile. I wondered about how your family, being colonialists, who were in privileged exile, whereas the characters in High Life, maybe they're a little bit privileged because they aren't in prison on the earth. How did your childhood experience perhaps inform that film?
It's difficult for me to make a link between my childhood and a film like I Live, because it's been nourished by reading science fiction and also meeting through a philosopher that I admire a lot called Jean-Luc Nancy. And through him, I met astrophysician Aurélien Barraud, and I wanted to imagine a story. It was an incestuous story, almost. A man alone in the space with his own daughter growing, and there are only two human beings there. And I thought, maybe. And Aurélien said, only if they are outside the solar system. So it means they have a great speed, because to go outside the solar system in a lifetime, it's not easy unless your speed is almost at least 80% the speed of the light. So little by little, I learned things, and so I have to say, my my intimate feeling when I was shooting High Life was I was in the heart of the character of Robert Pattinson. I was I thought I was him, touched by this little baby, and little by little the horrible incestuous thing slowly disappear, in a way, maybe the girl, of course, is in love with her father, but the father is trying to protect her in a way, but I think I was him in the film. I was not the little girl. Strangely enough, I don't know.
You need to wait for the microphone. Sorry, the Zoom audience can't hear you otherwise.
Sorry. Emily, you're going to run a lot?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your writing process. And
Yeah.
I mean, more specifically, like the earlier films that kind of are so fragmented and like maybe are composed of so many images. And I wondered if those images are found more in the shooting or if you're already thinking about them when you're writing the film.
Very, I have to say something about starting a script for me is not a story. I really believe it's worth to start when at least I have one scene in mind, but not a story, one scene I could almost visualize or hear, And from that scene, suddenly I realized I could capture a form, a sort of form, not a story, but a shape. And then as the writing start, never alone, because I am such a, I'm too pessimistic to be alone. With me, alone, only, I mean, it's only horrible things happen. So I need a partner in script writing to keep me going happily, Otherwise, I'm too pessimistic. And I know the process of writing. There is maybe a line, a storyline, but I enjoy ellipse when writing because I think it creates a little gap. When writing a script, it's not dangerous, that gap, And it's very exciting because when you write, you feel that little gap is bringing a little, it's like a little danger and it gives a sort of, it's exciting for the scene after, even reading books, you feel chapter after chapter, when there is a gap, it's really creating something. Now, in a script, it's a little bit dangerous because enjoying those gaps, I'm not very afraid to keep them in the shooting, in the shoot. I don't think, wow, it's too dangerous. I should, and maybe I should add a voiceover or a title. And last week, I had to go to Famous, the cinema school, and I had to show The Intruder. And back out of curiosity, because Michel Subor is dead, and Ekaterina is dead, and Jean-Luc Nancy is dead, and they were the three important matter. I mean, initiator of the film. I stayed and I watched the film, which normally I hate, but I watched the film and I was amazed. I said, "Oh my God!" Because in the script, you turn a page, you have a space, and you have maybe the number of the page, or there was first part, second part, third part. So suddenly in the film, nothing was written. It was slick, one piece, I said, and I was afraid, I thought I was crazy, really, I was totally afraid, and almost I said to the student, I have to apologize. Do not do that. Be aware it's dangerous, But in writing a script, when once you get through a scene, you like it, you like the scene, you're happy with the scene, and you know the shape of the movie. You have one scene in mind that will be the real thing in the film. Makes you very brave, even for crazy thing, And but it's dangerous, yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes me very brave, and now the last script I wrote, I try to be more no gap.
We have time for one final question.
There is in this room 2 persons that knew me when I was in college. I have to say, they knew me when I was not a grown-up adult.
Thanks for the.
I knew my sister too, and brother.
Since we're at the American Library, I wanted to ask you about the film U.S. Go Home, and just sort of if you could talk about the inspiration, like how prevalent was that sentiment after the war in France, and if kind of growing up you experienced a tension between the political influence of the U.S. and the arguable positive cultural influence of the U.S.
There was Arte proposed to 10 directors to describe a moment of when they were 15 or 14, to describe a party, what kind of music, what kind of dance, what was their life. And I remember in France at that time, because of the Vietnam, there were a lot of inscription on the wall, US go home. And I was living in a suburb. Like many kids, I was dreaming of America, of the state. But there was this sort of strange barrier that the Vietnam brought something after. It was just before 68, those movements were there was a rumor of a furor going sort of, and US Go Home, when I was taking the train going to Paris and reading that on the wall was very intriguing. And I remember Jean-Luc Godard, Masculin, Féminin, and it's Françoise Hardy leaving the embassy, US embassy, and it's written US Go Home on the car, And I thought maybe it was interesting for Arte to try to speak a little bit about that, Not, but it was abstract in a way. US Go Home was an abstract. It was like a logo, It was something that has nothing to do maybe really with the state and Vietnam, but has to do with that period of time where the young people, not only in France, were obsessed by a certain type of society. They wanted to break those rules, not US.
Can we have a final round of applause, please, for Adam and Claire?